How do I go there?
I have no idea. Great question.
Oh, wait. Maybe.
It's not going to be a.
Oh, it's here, it's here.
Yeah, because it's its own whole machine, of course.
Okay, I got it. There's a lot of machines going, a lot of parts.
Good, thanks. Exactly. Hello, hello. Oh, yeah. Can people on Zoom hear me too? Somebody put in the comments.
Yep.
They can? Thumbs up already. All right, that's good. That's good.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, and I guess we'll just pass this mic off, or how do you want to do it, Roberta?
I can use that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you can keep it on. It doesn't really matter.
Okay, well, we're going to start.
We're going to start.
Yeah,
Hey.
I'm Eric, and this is Roberta, and we're co-hosting this event. It's a fusion of the Quantified Self group, which I run, with Arts Salon.
And Arts Salon.
Yeah.
And before we start, I want to do the land acknowledgement. So I want to acknowledge the sacred land on which the University of Toronto operates. It has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat, Petun First Nation, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Spoon Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resource around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. And I wanted to kick off today's what is happening. Sorry? No, I am.
Yeah. Actually, I think you need to move 1 foot this way, because
Oh, because you don't see me.
yeah, you're just slightly out of frame, which is weird because that's where the lectern is. But like.
But it doesn't matter. You know me, right?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was the disembodied voice who did the land acknowledgement. But yeah, my name is Roberta, and I am the host of the Arts High Salon. And we got together. So we got together like when? Like in August or something? But we've been thinking about it for a long time, right?
It was about 6 weeks ago, I think we got together to talk about the idea of this
Finally.
meetup. I've been thinking about it for a while. I can't speak for you, but I mean, I think everyone's talking about this augmented or this like generative AI stuff, and like, what does it feel like? That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you wanted to resurrect the quantified self after the pandemic, and I really wanted to address some of the issues that came out of the expectations regarding generative AI, especially when it comes to education, but also other applications. So we got together and we started having a little bit of a chat, and we came out with a lot of like case studies and stuff that happened, and all like glitches and how students are using ChatGPT and how instead you can use it in a more creative way, et cetera. And so at the end, we decided to do an event, and we decided to invite a bunch of people. And like we have the tech person, engineer,
the tech.
Yeah. We have an artist, who's Ryan, who's here. And then we have an artist and educator. And then, well, I don't know if Antje is here, but like we will have a playwright and also educator and a mathematician and educator. Vicky, do you consider yourself more of a mathematician or an educator?
She's wearing the mathematician sweater. That's got to count for something.
Yeah. So yeah, I would like to start. So maybe I think that Eric has his slides ready.
Yeah,
so
this is my slide deck, so I can just start. But I was actually going to begin with a question about how many people really know much about the technology for this thing. I have 2 slides, which I'm happy to skip or elaborate on. So if you could raise your hand if you know nothing about how it works. And now raise your hand if you know a lot. Okay. Medium.
medium.
Yeah.
Do the slide.
Yeah.
I
So
think I put myself in the medium one
yeah,
as well.
I will do the slides. Obviously, 2 slides is not going to do justice to it. You could spend hours just talking about how the tech works, but I will do the 2 slides. And this first one, how do I get it to not show all this random stuff that's like blocking up? Whatever. Yeah. So the first slide is about large language models, which is the kind of thing that ChatGPT is. So there's an XKCD joke from maybe 2 years ago where they're literally just like stirring a giant pile of linear algebra until you get what you want. But basically, the way that it works is you take giant piles of really simple math, literally just linear algebra. You take like giant arrays of numbers and you multiply them together in uncomplicated ways. And the secret is you have a lot of them, not like millions or tens of millions or even hundreds of millions. You have billions and billions of these numbers. And then you do the dumbest thing you can possibly think of, which is you take everything that's ever been written and you give it chunks of what's been written and you ask it to predict the next word. Like literally you give it the first 30 words of an Amazon review and you ask it to predict the 31st word. And then you give it 31 words and you ask it to predict the 32nd word, and so on and so on. And you just do this trillions of times until utter boredom sets in. And somehow, via the magic of generative AI, that machine is now able to actually write English language that you can comprehend. And furthermore, with a little bit of fine tuning, which is basically a process of showing it like, here's a proper conversation exchange, right? Like, prompt response. It learns the idea of prompt response, and then you're able to give it a prompt and it will give you a response. And that's essentially the whole thing. So I've made it sound very simple. In practice, of course, to actually do this, billions of parameters, trillions of training thingies, you need data centers, you need massive numbers of computers. And it wasn't possible until maybe 10 years ago when people discovered that you can use what are called graphic processing units, or the things that we used to use in our computers to play video games. They're now using them to do this mind-numbing training task at massive scale. I just read a thing where apparently the training, or just the operating of ChatGPT uses like massive swimming pools of water just to run the air conditioning units every hour. Yeah, which doesn't tell you anything about the electricity, but I'm sure the electricity is also mind-boggling. And that's really the secret of LLMs, is just like huge amounts of scale and the totally dumb idea of predicting the next word. Any questions about that? Okay, that's a simple view. And then the second thing that, oh my goodness, the animated GIF is actually working. It's just very slow. So diffusion generators, this is the next thing. So it's like the Midjourneys of the world, the Stable Diffusions of the world. You give it a prompt and it gives you a piece of art, or in the case of Midjourney, 4 pieces of art, and then you get to choose. And the way these things work is sort of similar. There's like, again, a giant model of linear algebra with huge numbers of matrices that you multiply together. But the training here is different. What you do is you take every image on the internet and you add noise to it in successive steps to create a series of images with more and more noise until you get all the way back to like the screen in your TV with the white and the black noise. And then you train the machine in reverse. You give it the noise image and you ask it to predict the next image with less noise in it. and then the next image with less noise in it, and the next image with less noise in it. And when you do this to literally every image that's ever been made, everything you can find on the internet, anything you can license, they just pour all the images ever made into it, and it learns how to make images from noise. And then the other slightly more complicated piece is they'll take a piece out of the LLM that you just trained, which understands language, and they'll sort of plug it into the side of this model so that you can tell it, this image that you're making out of noise, it's about a cat, or it's about a building, or it's about a person, or whatever. Yeah, like what they actually are.
What are you writing? X equals 3y plus 2?
It sort of, yeah. Like most of these models use what's called transformers, and in a transformer, you have an incoming thing called the prompt. And then you have two giant matrices that you construct out of the prompt called the key and the query. And when you multiply those two together, then you multiply by a third giant matrix that's called the value. And that's in one stage. So you have three giant matrices, you multiply them together, and that gets you this thing called the embedding. And then you pass that embedding to the next layer, and it serves as sort of like the prompt of the next layer, from which you construct another key and another value matrix, and you multiply by another value matrix. And all of the parameters in these matrices are learned. So in each layer, there's thousands and thousands of parameters that you're learning. And then you do usually dozens of these layers. In the biggest models now, it's commonly like 50. And so you just have to imagine, three giant matrices being multiplied together, outputting a thing, do it again, do it again, do it again, 50 times in a row. And then at the end, you just have a very simple, fully connected thing where you take the last thing, you multiply it through one final matrix, and then you ask it to predict the values. You have a language, what do they call it? A vocabulary, which is literally the thing knows 50,000 words, and those are the only 50,000 words it can do. And some of the words are like chunks of words, and that's how it's able to make words it doesn't know. And then you ask it to predict what are the odds that the next word is any of these in a giant probability distribution function. And then when you sample from the machine, you just pick the highest likelihood words. And that's your final output, one token at a time. So I don't know if that gave you a feel for it, but it is really quite simple. There's some nonlinearities in it, some like pooling operations and other functions, but the vast majority of the math is literally just multiplying matrices together. Yeah. And so for diffusion generators, you take some of the embeddings from the language model, which tell it what the vocabulary words mean. Sure. And then you prompt it with those words, and it slowly generates images. Usually it takes many, many stages. It starts with noise like this, and then over time, it's doing more and more computation. The image is getting less and less noisy. It's adding more and more detail. And then at the end, it'll output these like totally awesome images. And like I said, for Midjourney, usually it'll give you 4, and then you can pick one. And then there's all kinds of tools now where you can take, once you have a final image, you can ask it for variations of that image, or you can do what's called in-painting, where you select tiny chunks of that image and be like, I want to regenerate this area because, it gave it weird hands, which these things are famous for. And these are the two huge kinds of models that have taken the world by storm in the last couple of years. There's a huge variety of other things that people are doing with machine learning. Another one lots of people know about is the self-driving stuff. So literally teaching cars how to drive themselves by looking at what comes in on cameras and other data that they can acquire. But these are the two that are sort of consumer accessible right now. Any questions about diffusion models? So I agree completely, right? Like an image is worth 1,000 words. But yeah, the question was, is there a way that they can compensate for the fact that language can't really describe an image? And the answer is, I agree fundamentally, like it takes 1,000 words to describe an image properly, and even then it doesn't really do it justice. And the weird thing is that you can prompt Midjourney with a single word, and it still makes stuff. What it makes is just really uncontrolled, right? Like the less you give it, the more it has to imagine. And actually, I have found this to be ludicrously powerful. Like if you have, a lot of the times, like I'm doing this crazy project, which I'm about to present, a lot of times I'll have really no idea of the kind of image I want, and I'll give it like 2 words, and it'll come up with stuff, and I'll be like, oh, well, I don't like these 3, but that one, that's actually kind of interesting. And then I'll add words to my prompt that are going to get me things that are more like that, only maybe slightly different or whatever. And so it's sort of like talking about artistic process. It's finding me the words, because, you know, I'm not an artist. I don't have any of that art speak, the highfalutin stuff that people write in the little thingamabobbers. I'm an engineer. I can't do any of that crap. You can put in anything you like. And in fact, here's another thing. I mean, this is now in my presentation, but I didn't usually write the prompts for Midjourney. I just asked ChatGPT to write the prompts, and then I would cut and paste. And this is why, like, the project, now I guess I'll get into the project. We're there. Oh yeah, here we are. We're talking about this. This is my slide. Language is hard. And like one of the weird things about this moment is we still really have no idea how to talk about what the hell these things do. You can come up with like metaphors and analogies, and you just heard my long-winded explanation of the actual math. Nobody really understands the emergent properties. Like the fact that the LLMs work at all is frankly mind-blowing. It shouldn't work, but it does. And so people have been coming up with ways to talk about the experience of interacting with them. One that actually has become very popular recently is this idea of infinite interns. So the machines are basically these like really compliant people. You just hire them for a job. They don't really know anything, but you can sort of set them loose and they'll like do something. And then, you know, like with interns, you gotta like be willing to like micromanage them for the first like while, right? Because they're all over the place. So, you know, ChatGPT is infinite interns, Midjourney is infinite interns. You can just set them loose. You can have them like, when I had Stable Diffusion running on my machine, I usually wouldn't ask it to make 1 image or even 4. I'd ask it to make like 100. And then, you know, 1 or 2 of them would be like worth something. It's just infinite interns. Stochastic parrots is a criticism by one of the famous AI ethics researchers, where basically like, it's not, the machine doesn't know what it's saying. It's essentially a statistical parrot, right? Like all it's doing is taking everything that it's read and then spitting out the next, like the most probable thing. Another way of saying that I like better than stochastic parrots is sort of this idea of the global unconscious. Like when you prompt Midjourney with a 1-word prompt, what you get back out is kind of like a zeitgeist of what the word means in images. And sometimes it's extremely weird because, you know, you're in some weird corner. But if you prompt it with like, you know, some regular words, you're going to get regular things. And so like one way of thinking about even ChatGPT is like when you type in a prompt, what you're doing is you're exploring this sort of global unconscious, this like statistical amalgam of all of humanity. You ask all of humanity, like, you know, your prompt, and ChatGPT gives you back this like weird, you know, global unconscious thing. So I actually wrote almost all of the text in this presentation. All of the images, however, were prompted usually with just a few words. So like this one, I literally prompted it with 1 word. This was metaphor, and it gave me this image. And, you know, I'm not sure that it really conveys metaphor, but it definitely conveys something. And it, I mean, you could go prompt it with that right now if you really want, but yeah. Try it, exactly. This is the fun of this era. You can just go try it. And in fact, at the end, when we're done with our presentations, I think we should just literally put Midjourney up and we can just go nuts on it. It's so much fun. Yeah, but for now, another thing that I ran across is this idea of like simulated universe rollouts. So one way of thinking what the training accomplishes is each thing that you give ChatGPT or that you give Midjourney is like one example from our universe. And then you're asking it to sort of continue that example, right? So it's like you've given it the starting conditions for a new universe and you've asked it to roll it out. And it's a little bit ambiguous what the word rollout means, but like when you think of a simulator, if you have like a, a traffic simulator or whatever, it knows from historical records what's likely to happen around rush hour. The streets are all going to jam up, right? And over time, it should learn not just like obvious things like rush hour, but even more subtle things. And like if you give it enough data, it's going to be able to predict, oh yeah, when the marathon shuts down chunks of the QEW or whatever, all hell breaks loose in this city. And so like the limit of a simulation is not in the training data. The limit of a simulation is it could learn reality as well as reality itself is. And so like that, the simulated universe argument is an argument that actually these things could be really, really intelligent. And I don't know that we see that yet. I don't think we're there yet. Like, even when you run it for 1 trillion tokens, I don't think it learns enough about reality to be able to do that. Plus the reality you're giving it is like the internet reality, which is this like seriously debased version of reality. Oh, I'm at my 10 minutes already. Oh, yeah. So we'll just have to totally go nuts. Yeah, farm animals. So my project is a solarpunk tarot deck. Hopefully you guys are at least familiar somewhat with tarot. Basically, it's like a deck of cards used for divination. And I started by asking I told ChatGPT, like, here's my project, Solarpunk Tarot. Can you come up with some card ideas? And it would generate me ideas. And I'd be like, hey, could you generate some more ideas that are like, related to this word? And I would just mash things together. And it would just come up with more and more ideas. And eventually I had like 500 of those. And I took them all, I put them in a spreadsheet, and I just ranked them. And then I extracted like the best 100. And then for each of the 100 ideas, I went back to ChatGPT and I'm like, hey, can you give me a description of what this card might look like the art? And I pasted that over in a Midjourney. And then it would generate crazy images. And recently I've been doing the last step, which is I take the card idea, maybe a little bit of description I already have, some of the art words or whatever. And I'm like, hey, can you write me an actual description of the card, an actual meaning of the like divinatory meaning, a haiku, and then some keywords. And it'll like spit stuff out. And usually its haikus are like mediocre, but I just ask it for more. And haikus actually have this really cool property where, because the number of syllables in every line is fixed, I can just cut and paste like the chunks of the haikus until I get a haiku I like. So I'm like a poetry hacker now. I could never write a haiku, but I could totally edit haikus. And I have lots more cards. And if I can figure out how to share it. Yeah, it's in the Firefox. Oh, that's you. It's apparently not in the Firefox. Maybe it's in the Chrome.
I think you sharing your screen. Everything on the screen will be seen.
Right, but is it even up?
Because at the beginning you have put it on Firefox.
I'll just go get it again, and then we'll have it. Oh, that's not it.
It's also just showing Firefox.
Yeah, I'm actually locating my thing. Okay, and then I agree with you to zoom, new share screen. This. So this is just going to cycle the crazy huge amount of art that I've made. And I'm going to use 1 more minute. Sorry, Roberta. So the thing about this project that was interesting is how little of the work I did. Like, yeah, I'm sort of like orchestrating it in the background, but I didn't make any of the art. I didn't write almost any of the text. I certainly didn't make any of the poetry. And when I print these, I'm not going to do any of the printing. I'm going to contract that all out too. So in the end, it's a little bit weird. I guess you can't see the names because it's blocking the names. Can I get it to not block the names?
Try and drag it.
You can play. And what I feel overall about the project is these tools were like incredibly empowering. Like, I couldn't possibly have done a project at this scale as a single person part-time even 2 or 3 years ago, right? Like, sure, some of the art has like questionable weirdnesses, and I'm happy to show you that later. Like, some of them are they have weird corner cases, strange stuff going on. And you know, a lot of these ideas for cards maybe aren't going to work. Like I'm going to build a playtesting deck, and we're going to have to actually try them for divinatory purposes, and a lot of them will fail. But you know, I've turned this giant art project into a sort of a numbers game in some sense, and it was super empowering. And I like interacting with ChatGPT. You learn how it works after a while, and I don't think of it as infinite interns, partly because even interns learn after a while, and ChatGPT never learns. I got better at prompting it. I got better at figuring out what it's good at and what it's not good at. And it feels more like micromanaging something, or like one of the analogies I missed was the farm animal thing. It feels kind of like leading a really stubborn horse. Yeah. And similarly with Midjourney, there's sometimes I would give it the prompt from ChatGPT and it would just turn out like a spectacular piece of art. And you're like, oh my God, you've nailed it. And then other times you get really uninspiring stuff. And you go around in circles, editing the prompt, going back to ChatGPT to reprompt it, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes, like after 20 images, I just throw in the towel. I'm like, that idea is never going to work. I just need a different idea entirely, or I need a simpler thing. Or sometimes I just junk the whole card. I'm like, well, if I can't get art, card is useless. And Midjourney's limits are much more confining than ChatGPT's limits. So in particular, you can ask for sort of two elements in a Midjourney image. You know, you can have, like I have this Junkyard Genius card. What I wanted was a guy in a junkyard making a robot. That turned out to be impossible. You can ask for two things in Midjourney, and you can achieve that usually. If you ask for three things, I have had exactly no luck. Three things is just impossible. And so in that way, it's like entirely unlike a regular artist, because I feel like a regular artist would have taken that, like, oh yeah, a guy in a junkyard with a robot, no problem. Would have taken it, no problem. But, you know, conversely, I also, like I said, I have this experience of like, I don't have any idea what like the image for metaphor should be. And you can just give it a thing and it will come up with something. It doesn't matter what you say, it always comes up with something. And that can just be so powerful, so unbelievably powerful. And so I guess that brings me back, like my final point is it's super empowering. And I know there's all kinds of weirdness that people are talking about, like all of the copyright claims now that are going against OpenAI and Midjourney and all these companies. Obviously, we're somehow enclosing the art commons here and then, you know, running it for, you know, my fun and profit. and that's all complicated. But it's definitely democratizing art here for me, and it's been incredible. And with that, I'm done. Yay. And you want Ryan? Okay.
Yeah, I think.
And we can just figure out where Ryan's slides went, right? Here?
You do the
And then here? Yeah, you're good. And then you want this, yes.
How much time do I have?
So I would start like with the 15 minutes.
Okay.
So
I'll do
I'll
the.
give you 10 when it's 10 and then.
Great.
And then
Okay. All right, everybody can hear me? Great. So yeah, I'm a software artist. I've been using AI in my art since 2015, and I sort of ended up doing a lot of concerts where I do visuals based off AI and work with musicians and other people like that. I use only open source software, and I make open source software for my art. And now the slideshow is not working. Oh yeah, it's backwards. That's right. Everything goes backwards. So I wanted to talk about, yeah, now it's going to automatically go. That's wonderful. I wanted to talk about a question that's coming up, which is, what is AI generative art going to do to artists? But I think there's a better question, which is, why do we make images? And I think an even better question, when these tools really expand in their capability to like create any image that we ever want, is why do you make images? And Eric is facing this right now. And so I've been thinking about this, and these tools really help us think about this, I think. So because we're entering a world where making images doesn't look like a painter or a photographer, it looks like describing the image. It looks like being a film director or an art critic or a curator. And so that's a much different way of making images, but I think it's just as valid. And I think that technique should be a key to your art practice, not locking away what art is, but like you should be able to use whatever technique that works for you to make images. And so these tools, I think, are an incredible way of doing that. But I think we need to set aside sort of the intrinsic value of process. You know, process is like creating your soul or your journey in life. We can all agree that's a good thing. So I think the real question is, why do you like an image? And these are amazing tools for figuring that out. So I was confronted with this question when I needed to learn how to use the Stable Diffusion tool. And this is like a complicated tool. You can install it on your own computer and it generates images like Eric used Midjourney. Stable Diffusion's another version. And it's a complicated tool. And so I needed to find images that I loved that would like sustain me through the difficult, brutal process of learning a new tool. And so I found out that I love pictures of images of ink dropped into water. And so I combined that with my love of dance and color and sort of abstract imagery, and that's what sustained my sort of deep dive into this. And you know, I started mixing these images with other sorts of images of nebula, of anemone, fireworks, neurons, and like just playing it around. And you kept falling in love with these images as I would find these spaces of these images that don't really fit into any classification. That really was something that was really, I found that was important to me for some reason. So these images helped me explore this tool, and I think that was really important. And I still don't know if I can explain why I love these images, besides sort of the obvious. But I think that the process of curating these images is what's actually important here. So I had folders. I had the good folder, the okay folder, and the bad folder, and I would sort all these images. And I made thousands of these images, and I curated thousands of these images, and I ended up with 1,200 of the keepers. And so those 1,200 images are me. That's the curation process of these images is what makes me who I am. And I think that's a really beautiful process. Leo has this amazing quote talking about how the touching of our minds through this sort of maze of civilization is this miracle, this miracle of translation. And these machines are really great at translation. And the translation doesn't have to be just in language. It can be through the making of images. And these images can help us, like we say, you can't express everything through language. Now we can have machine translators that are helping us express ourselves through images. And I think that's a super powerful, incredibly useful thing to do. Now, I do think there's lots of things that can go wrong because, as these tools make it very easy and accessible, you get the same sort of effects of like how many people are writing handwritten letters these days. So like the handwrittenness might go away as we have these translators sort of acting on our behalf. The other thing I like this quote for is that it doesn't prescribe which minds are connecting. It allows for minds that are non-human to connect to human minds. I think that's something we're going to see a lot of, where we're connecting with other animals, but also with these new machine minds. So what are these machine minds? Brian House puts it very nicely that data is plural. These minds are plural. We're connecting with the minds of many other humans. And I think that's a really nice way to think about it. And I think it's important to note now that this isn't really a new thing, that we're actually surrounded by artificial intelligences that are our corporations, our governments, our institutions. These are organisms that have intelligences that are made up of humans, plural humans. And so these new machine minds are very similar. And if you're concerned about sort of the safety of AI, first step is to worry about the alignment of human values with corporations like the fossil fuel industry that is already causing us a lot of trouble. So these machine minds have this perspective of the many, and that is maybe something that we're actually quite used to, because a lot of what we talk about for intelligence is that you have a multitude of experiences and you try and draw some sort of generalization between them. And so even our own intelligence is this plural generalization that goes on. You could call it a singularization or a classification of these multitude of experiences is what you think of as like understanding something. How are all these things connected? So we're actually quite used to this idea of this plurality being intelligence. But I think there's lots of things about AI that's actually quite alien. It's more to do, I think, with the training data that we give it and that it's digital. So we actually share a lot of things with the machine intelligences. So I wanted to give you sort of another case study of my project called Transmigrations. This is for a concert that I did in the summer. I have another concert. This is coming up in November in Stratford as well. And so here I was really wanting to investigate sort of remix, appropriation, representation, and letting the machine have a lot of leeway to combine things. And so in this music, we're combining 8 different genres of music. And in the images, I'm pairing things together. So the pairing is something like a National Geographic photo of a group of genre A dancers dancing to a genre B band. And it would imagine these things. And so here we have like Indian music with hip hop. And we have like a Lebanese version, Malfouf Lebanese with hip hop. And sort of here's another take on that. And here's another take, Lebanese hip hop. Lovely, I love it. You can also do hip hop polka. And of course, it really goes into the polka dots because it's interpreting polka in lots of different ways. But one of the lovely things I discovered is that it makes mistakes in beautiful ways where like it didn't get gendered all the time. And when I saw this, I really fell in love with these images. I was super happy now. And so I have just this, just wonderful images. But it also really had like a wonderful imagination about polka instruments. These are fantastic. Again, like when I started seeing these, this is like working with a collaborator who is way more imaginative than I am and really wonderful. Look at that, this is amazing. What are these? I don't know what these are, but I want to play one of these things. Like this guy's hat is a giant instrument over on the right. Like, I mean, it's just fantastic. So this is like West African drummers mixed with polka. Yeah, and it also does some really sweet imagery like this. Again, West African drumming and polka. But you can also do like DJ and techno polka. And you can do this techno with other sorts of things, techno and like samba. And then doing sort of Latin dancing and the West African, mixing those. Again, like I didn't give it any direction about gender or like who's dancing besides the genre, and was able to come up with these things. Here's some more Lebanese African drumming. Oh yeah, and so when I started the project, I was trying to evaluate these pictures based on like bad hands or like, again, fused arms, like, oh, should I get rid of this? But by the end of the project, I was loving these images because, the things that I was falling in love with was, were these people having a good time? Were they really into the dance that they were doing, this fictional dance, this culture that doesn't exist? And so this is like a good example of like, yeah, it didn't get everything right in a classic sense, but it got everything right in this way I really fell in love with these images. So I think this is like a really nice, interesting way of making images. And yeah, it got me thinking though, as I was doing this. So I'm looking at thousands of these images and I was wondering like, you know, is this something that I can love? And like, is this something that we could all love? And why is this something that we don't already love? Why are these genres separate and we can never come together? So, you know, it raised some very interesting questions for me. And so these tools for me become sort of this ultimate remix machine. And as Eric kind of pointed out, is that like what I discovered as an artist, and I consider myself quite imaginative, is like my imagination is garbage compared to this thing because it has to produce something. Like it can't, you know, it's not too embarrassed. It's not like it can't just give up. It has to do something. And you might have to do 100 somethings, and it's very easy for you to tell which is garbage, but that 100th image might be magic. And so it's a very different process from typical art, but it's can be very rewarding. So yeah, I also discovered in that curation process that, you know, people are much better at curating than creating out of whole cloth. And with the machine generated images, you can be ruthless in your curation. You know, you don't have to hold back. It's not a human who made this image. You don't have to protect their feelings. And that ruthlessness really can guide you to what you love and what it is that you love about these images. And so it really helped me as an artist to have that curation practice. And I think most artists don't actually spend enough time doing curation. So these tools can really offer that up. So sort of in final, to sum up, I think it's also important to remember that this is the beginning. And what's coming is this sort of concept that I call when all dreams come true. And so this is whatever you imagine, the machine will help you make it true. And this is amazing, except if people's dreams are to be emperor of the world, then we live in a nightmare. And so one of the things that I think we'll have to face as a society is figuring out how we make everybody's dreams into the dreams of an artist, dreams that we want to share and share with others. And it's just not going to be safe or feasible to live in a world where people have dreams of domination or hurting others, because the machine will be able to help them make that true. All right, thank you. Can you feed it which, sorry? So, yeah, the question was, can you feed it sound? Absolutely, there are, it's coming soon. There's already things coming like that, but probably in the next year, that is definitely going to be a big thing where audio generation and music generation and taking audio as the prompt is going to be a thing. Yep.
Question before Daniel starts.
So Eric's images were created with Midjourney, and yours look quite different. I can't remember if you mentioned which AI generated these images that you showed us.
Yeah, so mine are from Stable Diffusion, which is the open source version of diffusion. And yeah, it's actually very curious because it's open source. People are able to make like their own like customizations of that AI. And so the stuff that worked for me was like customized versions of the Stable Diffusion model, or like specifically by people who loved realistic images. And otherwise it was sort of incapable of getting that level of realism. Yeah, so the community around these models is really quite fascinating too. Yeah, so like on the other side is that people are making, you know, their fetish models as well, which is like, you know, something we're going to really have to deal with as well, where like you can make infinite amounts of any fetish that you want.
No, this is actually a problematic thing that we might talk about later. I don't know. Are you guys ready, or should we take another question? Because we're gonna take questions at the end, like when we open the floor to everybody. So keep your question, and we will get to you later. Okay? Is that fine, or do you wanna ask the question now? Ryan.
That art should be democratized. I mean, the goal of the artist should be democratized by these tools.
Yeah, I'm heavily biased. I think everybody should do as much art as possible. So, yeah, I really full support of. Yeah, so I'm very biased towards people making art. So, yeah, I think it's very important to me that there are tools that help people express themselves in however they're like currently capable, and it gives them these opportunities to express themselves in ways that they can't do yet. And hopefully that acts as sort of an inspiration to like learn how to do more photography or other types of art. Yeah.
Ready?
Oh yes. Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Before I start with my talk, I wanted to. I was just thinking of this when we were talking about AI getting things wrong. So if you ever tried Googling salmon swimming in a river with an AI, you would get something that doesn't quite look like what you might want. You get a bunch of salmon. So we have this this kind of disparate connection between what people think, because these things have been labeled by people, and how that's passed to a computer and how that is then interpreted. So there's lots of nice little errors. And I think there's going to be a really interesting point that we can kind of talk about in the Q&A later about like language and representation, and like who we choose to represent, and if that should be done or if that should not be done, etc. But how do we get to the full screen again? It doesn't super matter, but if we can, that'd be lovely. Perfect. Okay, so my name's Dan. I'm an artist and creative technologist. I've been working with AI in my work kind of artistically, but also commercially for probably like the last 4 years. And I also embed it into the education that I do. A lot of the commercial work I do is more around sort of generative design, creative computation for sort of advertising quite often, but I also do a lot of things with audio and large kind of installations. If you want to look at some of my work, Visual Code Poetry is my Instagram. It's the best place to look at that. My fascination with AI has I had a lot of crossover of both Eric and Ryan, but as the tools have sort of progressed in their ability to be really accurate, I've become really interested in doing things that break that and are more lo-fi. So what I like to think about myself is I apply lo-fi ideas to hi-fi technologies, and I bring that to a lot of the work I do as an educator. So I teach in the digital media department at York University and in digital futures at OCAD University. And so I try and bring these ideas from sort of conceptual art and Fluxus and Dadaism, kind of these absurdist ideas, often kind of structural or simple games. I try and bring these to contemporary technology and challenge people to see how these types of conceptual tools can augment what we're doing with technology. A big inspiration for me has been things like, I mentioned Dadaism, but there's this great book of surrealist games. And I think this really links in with some of the stuff we were talking about with this creative subconscious. A lot of what the Dadaists and surrealist kind of outputs were is trying to kind of take art offline a little bit. And, you know, for example, with automatic drawing, trying to go offline, not think about the form you were drawing and see what the subconscious brought up. A lot of these people also incorporated elements of the occult as well. And things like Cut Up and Exquisite Corpse, which if you don't know the name of that, you'll know the output. when I started bringing this into my classes, I started this like during the pandemic where everyone was kind of bored. And right when GPT-3 started coming out, I sort of got people to generate essentially like funny plays to entertain themselves. So a lot of the class at the time really liked Fast and Furious movies. So we got about 50 different variations of this. And I picked this one because I think it's a really good example of how AI works and doesn't work in terms of like these LLMs. Like we have something that reads a bit like a script. It's totally ridiculous. But my favorite thing about it is it kind of has the form of those types of Fast and Furious movies, or like a Guy Ritchie movie with the cake shop edit, which you can imagine as like a cutaway to seeing Vin Diesel in his earlier years where he's running this cake shop in Beverly Hills. And that was kind of the start of incorporating it as more like a playful tool actually into the types of education that I was doing. Because I kind of am in this weird position where I'm teaching people who are, programmers how to program, but also to make art. And I'm teaching people who are artists a bit of how to program, but also how to think programmatically. So I'm kind of in between both worlds and trying to translate that for people. So another pandemic game we made with kind of end of pandemic using stable diffusion was this sort of auto generator based on Wordle that we kind of came up with as a group. So you started out with an image that was generated, and then people had to essentially guess what that image was. And then the guesses from the day before would be fed in. It was all kind of autonomous. And the only problem with it is at that point, the image generation was fairly good. So people guessed really quickly. You didn't get lots of wacky guesses. Like it pretty much was on point for what people were guessing. They kind of, in general, got the image. So you kind of reached this point of equilibrium where you didn't get anything new and exciting because the average consensus was what the image was. But it was kind of a fun little way of kind of leading in to some of those types of surrealist games I mentioned, like the Exquisite Corpse, which you may have all played in school, where you fold over a piece of paper, draw something, give it to your partner, a person next to you. They draw what they think is going to come, and you get this image. Beige, okay. So we might have noticed lately that some of the images that we get, some of the text that we get, it's kind of there's a sheen to it. It's kind of corporate, especially if the text, we can kind of tell it's not that edgy. It's kind of like the very, very middle ground. And so this is something that kind of we did actually fairly recently, just as a fun beginning of term exercise, where we tried to think about something very boring and basic like a WikiHow, and try to fully automate the process of generating an article. We settled on, as a class, how to be a cool DJ. These are some of my favorite points, but you can actually kind of see from this that it kind of quite accurately gets the illustrations and the form of a WikiHow. We did kind of nudge in the direction of being a bit pretentious. So we had, we really wanted the drop and some of the DJ hand signals that we see from a lot of, like David Guetta and things like that. So a lot of times I bring in these tools to be humorous, but there's a reason for that. So I want students to have a couple of things in their vocabulary. So I really want them to have a fluent and realistic relationship with AI tools. And this means understanding how much work they have to put in to create something that's valuable. Because I've definitely been here with some things where you start off and you think, it'll be so fun, I'll get it to do this amazing thing. It doesn't work. You keep trying to get the AI, if we're just working in the context of a generative AI where you're just working with text and you're not actually coding. You can get in a loop where you're not quite getting what you want, but it's nearly there. And it takes a lot longer than if you actually just did it yourself sometimes. So having a realistic relationship with these AI tools, knowing what they can and can't do and how they can augment their practice. I think that's really important. Secondly, I think it's very important to develop vocabularies to understand and recognize AI-generated content. We're getting to this point where you might be scrolling on Instagram, and if you're not critically looking at images, you don't actually clock that it's an AI image. Sometimes you have to take a double take. And also, just because, there's this vibe where people think, oh, AI is great, I'll get it to do my writing, I'll get it to write my CV. Most people have the ability to tell if all of your writing is AI generated, and it scores you less points. I want actually my students to incorporate AI in their work. I have no problem if they're doing that, but I want it to be in imaginative, interesting ways and not beige. And I think it's important for them to have that criticality, and something I found is really useful to them is basically letting them create pieces of writing that they then grade. And then from the process of grading that, whether it's a piece of creative writing, if it's something that's an essay, they actually see that it's not as good as they think it is. They have this imagination that AI is much more accurate than it really is. They find the things that are inconsistent, they find the things that are plain wrong. And it actually helps them have a healthier relationship, I think, by going through that reverse process. And I want them to understand the limitations and biases of AI. For example, I think Ryan mentioned government stuff. So how is AI, what are the biases of the people that train the AI? Where is it pushing you towards? What kind of mechanisms are people using to catalog people and control us and potentially put difficult situations and difficult data sets for a variety of people? But also how to navigate and subvert these ideas so that you personally have greater agency and control, particularly in the work that you're doing, whether it's creative, commercial, or if you're just using it as a life hack to speed up your life. We often find that these tools are very one-size-fits-all kind of vibe, but often very specific use. For example, like if you're like in the queer community, you can find that your voice maybe isn't mirrored in these tools. And so how can you reflect yourself in interesting and unique ways using these tools involves a bit more work and some hacking. And again, part of this is turning this upon ourselves. So, okay, I'll finish up. But by turning this upon ourselves, we can, rather than generating an image, we can see what an image is categorized as. And it can be quite decimating. You read all these horrible things about yourself. So this is clip interrogator. Clip is essentially the language model that you place to train to actually get to the images with something like Midjourney. And then you think, oh, that's not accurate at all. And then you generate it, and it is pretty accurate. I'm just another average white guy in my bedroom. But what you can start doing with these types of things is you can think about feedback, which is a classic surrealist technique, is doing something, putting it back into the input. And again, that's kind of a mirror for some of these multiple AI, this process of multiple times interrogating something and coming up with the next iteration. So this is way back. This was before DALL-E 2 even. This is a very, very early one where we tried just giving it an image, categorizing it as text. The model was really bad at the time. And eventually, like very, very quickly, you just got jellyfish in the dark. It wasn't very exciting. A few iterations on, feeding in things like a Caroline Polachek record, again with a basic image to text model, again really boring. You get like to this equilibrium really fast. But if you try more verbose models, you can start off with an image of noise. Essentially, this is a script that takes and you start off with an image of noise. It writes what it thinks it is. It feeds that output back, and it just happens repeatedly. And you can get a bit further with that, but basically you get to cubism like in about 20 or 30 goes. But what's really useful is people actually can then look at what the computer is actually, what these models are actually writing. You can feed in a bunch of images, see that process of it transforming into these cubist paintings, and it can help you with your prompt engineering. And seeing that can be useful. I won't talk about this. This is a great kind of AI collage work by Joel Simon, who developed Artbreeder. If you want to check it out, I'll show you later. But before I finish up, I wanted to show you some outcomes of these methods that I've been working with. So one outcome is this idea of integrated co-creation. So I took over some more kind of like bog standard arts courses for creative writing. And part of that was introducing them to generative AI in various ways, image, text. And they weren't that interested in the AI part of it at all. They kind of just preferred making images themselves. But what they really liked was using it kind of as a co-conspirator to create these almost like choose your own adventure stories. So we use this app called Twine. It's a really basic HTML editor. This is kind of the story that this student had mapped out called Mia. And the story she created was about her 19th birthday, where she walked in on her boyfriend and a friend having a seance to essentially kill someone at the party to summon this man. So you get this kind of sped up iterative process of creation, and sometimes some quite funny stories. But they really like that kind of combination between authorship and co-creation. Other people really like to use it for just creating storyboard assets and creating assets for games. That's been a very popular use, because at the end of the day, most of the students I have want to make video games. That's why they're in creative computation. And some people like to use it as kind of a rapid prototype way for building physical interfaces, whether that's for apps. This isn't really in the LLM generative AI sector, but it's a really useful way of doing things that people are working with quite a lot and seems to really engage. This is slightly older tech, but for example, like, audio analysis model for this game of Snake, where you can say up, down, left, right, etc., and control the snake in real time. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I have more to say in Q&A later, but thank you.
We will definitely ask a lot of questions afterward, but thanks so much for all this walking through. So I think we should stop sharing the screen, because I believe that the next two people who wanted to talk with us about their approach to art, teaching, science, etc., do not have any slides. Antje? Do you want to? I know that. I don't want to single you out. You can't put your computer on, unfortunately.
That's okay.
Okay.
Power of imagination.
Perfect.
Hello, everybody.
I'm gonna give you
The thing.
the thing, because people are
Power of the voice.
in person. Because people are online and they won't be able to hear you.
Hello, people. Can you see me? So, yeah, this is a little bit improvised, I have to say.
By the way, Antje Buddha, who is you're many things. You can introduce yourself. You're like I can't even
many things.
start
I'm
thinking
also
about it.
Human. Yeah, so my name is Antje Butte. I'm the Artistic Research Director of the Digital Dramaturgy Lab Squared, which is affiliated with the Center for Drama, Theatre and Performance Studies at the University of Toronto. And if I had known better what the format for this event is, I would have prepared some slides. But my understanding was that I was supposed to share some of the ideas related to AI. So I will not specifically respond to the three presentations. I think I would have liked then to have conversations with each of you beforehand. I just want to share a couple of things that I'm interested in and curious about. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a computational artist. That doesn't mean I'm not interested in what these people are doing and how they're doing it. So I do work with computational artists sometimes, but I work with a lot of interdisciplinary people, including many in the Art-Sci Salon. And I try to think about, to summarize maybe some of the aspects that interest me with regard to AI. And I kind of found 3 points. There are more, but for the purpose of this exercise, I will keep to 3. The first one is collectivity. The second one is stupidity. And the third one is A/I, or what I would call artistic intelligence. So I kind of called the headline of what I'm saying, collectivity, stupidity, A/I, performing creative doubt and laughter. As for collectivity, I'm interested in collective culpability and responsibilities, as can be critically, collectively, and creatively investigated through a praxis of A/I or artistic intelligence regarding new and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning in the context of global capitalism, new heights of strangely entangled conversions of autonomous machines and concepts of individual autonomy, desires for freedom, equal access, and self-determination. This includes recent developments of generative AI, as well as what the MIT Technology Review on September 18th, 2023, recently called the next level, which according to DeepMind's co-founder Mustafa Suleyman is called interactive AI. So AI, generative AI, interactive AI. Interactivity already assumes a certain relationality which points beyond an individual user or a fabricated self. This relational and collective aspect is not new, but often overlooked, as could be seen in discussions about the individual player's apparent failure in beating IBM's Deep Blue by chess player Garry Kasparov or DeepMind by Go player Fan Hui. To think of these failures to beat the networked and collective systems of massive human collaboration, financial investment, and infrastructure as individual failures or as a self gone astray boggles my mind and could be interpreted as human stupidity or on an irritating scale. I'm inspired by discussions like Nadim Mouawad's Feminists in the Panopticon, How Surveillance Capitalism Captures Feminist Movements, as well as Jason Lewis et al. Making Kin with Machines, which discusses AI from the multiple indigenous perspectives, as well as Ichi Ito's Resisting Reduction Manifesto, and a play that I have worked with a number of times called Oracle Jane. As for the stupidity part, I'm really interested in it as a creative endeavor and method. As a theater and performance scholar artist, I'm interested in performances of deceit as a function of AI and capitalist frameworks, i.e. Guy Debord's Society of Spectacle, Deleuze and Guattari's rhizomatic ideas on schizophrenia as a capitalist phenomena. Furthermore, of interest is the notion of imitation, as in Alan Turing's Imitation Game and Bertolt Brecht's understanding of imitation in his theater praxis philosophy, as well as notions of artificial stupidity, which in fact is a term that exists in a praxis that exists. Artificial stupidity was introduced by Alan Turing in what is now known as the Turing test, which started as an imitation game between a female human participant and an AI disguised as female, and a human interrogator. I'm not sure about the gender of that interrogator. The setup in 1950 was gendered, which is also interesting from a queer feminist perspective, notwithstanding Turing's own gay queerness. Artificial stupidity was necessitated by the concern, as Turing stated, that machines cannot make mistakes. And the interrogator then quickly would figure out the difference between the stupid female participant and the smart AI machine disguised performatively as female. Hence, AI algorithms must inscribe human levels of imperfection or perhaps gendered, racialized, class, stupidity in order to mimic humans more accurately and trick the human interrogator into more complicated interactions with the machine as to not bore the human user and their selves to a machinic death of computational perfection. Applications of this strategy can be found in chatbots, game design, and algorithms. There are counter-arguments which boil down to the question, who needs a computer that can't type? Likewise, we might ask, who needs humans who can't question typing in the first place? I'm inspired by the discussions of stupid AI, for example, by Hito Steil and Kate Crawford on stupid AI and the value of comradeship. Should I continue? AI, A/I, artistic intelligence. In 1955, John McCarthy at Dartmouth College thought of ways how a summer seminar on machinic learning could elicit funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. He and his collaborators invented the term artificial intelligence in a funding proposal to perform two objectives. First, distinguish their approach from cybernetics and Norbert Wiener's influence, who they didn't like, and make sure the funder is intrigued enough to provide funding for a summer camp of nerdy males who had a particular understanding of the praxis of learning. It says, this proposal, the study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. I'm intrigued by the performative creativity of the proposal writing that translated into funding success, as well as the validity to think about the politics of simulation. AI, once it reached buzzword currency levels, is these days surely attracting interest in sponsorship funding. Just utter the word. We have apparently reached distracting levels, as an article in June 2023 in the Harvard Business Review titles, "The AI hype cycle is distracting companies," which brings us back to the schizophrenic properties of capitalism and its machines. So to contain the hype, the fear and hysteria unfolding, my university has, over the summer of 2023, swiftly published a number of documents on how to tackle the issue in learning and research environments, academic integrity and AI, guidance on the appropriate use of generative artificial intelligence in graduate theses, ChatGPT and generative AI in the classroom, generative artificial intelligence in the classroom, generative AI tools and copyright considerations. The Digital Dramaturgy Lab and the subsequent Digital Dramaturgy Lab Squared has started in 2016 to more proactively engage with developments related to AI by starting to develop a praxis of A/I, artistic intelligence. This includes quite a list of projects and examples, which I can share with people interested, so I don't want to go on with this, but I just want to mention that I did use generative AI, the DALL-E application, recently when I was invited by Trina Moyen and Angel Carter to collaborate on their indigenous storytelling project, The Cave That Hummed a Song. This project was first presented at the Women at Play Festival in February and later at an Indigenous Fringe Festival in Peterborough. And it is about, obviously, colonial violence as it plays out on the female body with the missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I was asked if I would help them in creating and designing some video projection design for them. And we came to the point where they wanted to use images inside a cave which has red hands. And so they did bring some physical paint and their physical hands to the rehearsal room. We took photographs. And I tried to make something of those, and it turned out to be, it didn't seem to work within the poetic context of the project. So I thought AI, the DALL-E application, is created by mostly populations who transfer their particular biases into this software, and who might not feel a particular responsibility to engage in these questions of colonial violence as it plays out on female bodies. So I integrated the images that we made with those images that all the many people who are behind DALL-E created, and then that was used as one of the video projections. So what happened there was an encounter, but also a critique at the same time, and they accepted the outcome of this, so it was actually used in the performance. And with that, I want to leave you to your own creative stupidity. I'm a total fan of that. And I think that's also a basis where we all can meet in very human ways.
Vicky Zhang is going to say something next. And by the way, I asked people to just bring whatever they had. Like, there was not a formal or informal presentation. So like everybody brought whatever they felt like. So, and I'm very satisfied by that.
Yes, I do feel I seem to be answering this prompt wrongly, so basically Roberta gave me a prompt, which is, as an educator, how are you struggling with AI, especially generative AI, in your classroom? And I really didn't know what to expect tonight, so I'm not sure if this is even relevant. We'll see. This will be a mystery. So I myself, I am an associate professor teaching stream in the statistical science department at U of T. But curiously, whenever I say I teach in stats department, I have to add that I actually teach in a very small program in the stats department. I teach in the actuarial science program, which basically means insurance, mathematics, and financial mathematics. So I think I'll start with what our sister program, Stats, is doing. And then I'll talk a bit more about what we are doing. And I think there is an interesting contrast, hopefully worth sharing. So what is our Stats program doing? So for the current academic year, my colleagues in the Stats have taken a very conservative approach. As NJ was saying, during the summer, there was a flurry of notifications about how to deal with generative AI. So my colleagues somehow took the most conservative approach, which is they moved all the assessments into classrooms and tutorials. In other words, into more supervised environment. They limited all the project and homework to less than 5% of all course grade. So the current approach is basically to mitigate the use of ChatGPT in courses as much as possible. We found that ChatGPT is very good at providing short answers to free response questions. So if you're asking students to explain a statistical concept, ChatGPT can give you very brilliant answer from textbooks, give case studies. So basically, we can't ask these questions anymore. However, there are still blind spots. So we found ChatGPT is less capable of performing well in interpreting outputs, statistical outputs that's provided as an image. So some of my colleagues are trying to circumvent the use of students using ChatGPT. They're focusing on these areas that it's not performing very well yet. But I've been speaking to other statistics educators outside U of T, and I've encountered many who have a very different take. They think they want to leverage ChatGPT for stats and data science education as much as possible, They believe that integrating ChatGPT, by doing so, they're really simulating the real life work environment the students will be graduating into. And that's a more realistic approach. It's probably a better approach for this generation of students. So what they're doing is they're actually using ChatGPT to generate course content that include lecture notes, practice quizzes, sometimes exam questions. Of course, they're doing rounds of editing and going through iterations or prompts to refine the material spat out by ChatGPT. I know of some statistical programming courses. A common way to integrate ChatGPT is to have students basically prompt the machine to write R codes to perform a specific task. And they will run the ChatGPT generated code in R, and then ask the students to assess whether the codes actually worked well or not. Have students explain how they determined the codes have worked or not, and explain line by line what the generated code is doing. So you can see, just as in the art world, as Ryan was saying, so artists now are increasingly become curators of art. Essentially, we're training students to become curator and editor of art, computing codes as well, as opposed to traditional programmer. So that's a bit about the sister program. So I teach a variety of courses in actual science program. So during the summer, I was combing through my assessments to see how much changes I would need to make in the presence of generative AI. Surprisingly, at this point anyways, I had to make changes and improvements in course content, of course, but the format of my assignments are not in need of very significant change. And this really prompts me to kind of reflect on the nature of my field as opposed to general stats, even though my field is closely related to stats and some seeing this as a subfield of stats. And I think these reflections show the disparity of impact AI has on different professions. And even though I am in a niche field, I thought those reflections may be worth sharing today. So as people here know, tasks utilize manual dexterity, social intelligence, and creativity are deemed more challenging to computerize, although artists have shown that's not the case. But still, with manual dexterity and social intelligence, these tasks are harder to replace by AI in the near future. So in terms of my field, actuaries in the real world, they perform periodic pricing and rate reviews, reserve reviews, and also predict model refreshers. And these actuaries will be at the forefront of negative impact from AI, because even as different executions of these routines can lead to different conversations with stakeholders, the routines themselves will likely follow very similar procedures within each iteration. Of course, these more dynamic conversations that will follow these routines will still happen, but that will be limited to a relatively small number of participants, such as managers. So from this perspective, AI does bode ill for a large group of professionals. However, in fact, our profession has been automated for more than 25 years. In fact, in 2012, 11 years ago, I probably stupidly wrote an article for a professional magazine arguing that actuaries may be obsolete in the next few years due to advanced industry software automating large aspects of actual work. And I myself was programming these software at the time. So I was fairly convinced, but I was proven wrong so far. And why is that? I was thinking, so these technologies, including AI, certainly they provide a cheaper and comparatively effective alternative to humans in many cases. But that does not guarantee employers to utilize that alternative. For instance, in my profession, consensus building, this is something we don't think about. But when we build a mathematical model, a big part of it is actually consensus building. What does that mean? Can the model tell a good and convincing story to a variety of stakeholders? Can the model even pass sniff tests by those seasoned, experienced stakeholders? Would every stakeholder accept a model that AI built? We are actually seeing a lot of reluctance, both from people, professional, and organization, to buy into AI. And that certainly can slow the demise of the profession. And so that's part of it, consensus building. Another part of it is actually regulatory barrier. So new regulations in different jurisdictions actually keep popping up in this 11 years since I wrote this article as a response to macroeconomic conditions. And each round of regulatory shift requires new math modeling as well as new compliance work. So that actually generated a lot of new segments for this profession. And other reasons include proprietary data set from the financial sector, legal scrutiny on the final products, AI's penchant for hallucination, or all very reasonable reasons why the profession have been very slow in assigning key roles to AI. So in general, obviously, when you get to the upper end of any domain knowledge, nuances increase, and that explains why my colleagues in general stats are really panicking in terms of how to educate their undergrad students when we in actual science are less so. So we as a field can be understood as applying stats and math to a particular domain. And domain-specific knowledge is as important as the tools, which is stats and math. So as a result, we have our own terminologies, even when referring to concepts in general stats. We have our own niche models and techniques. Our courses are usually involving higher order thinking, solving a real world problem that require deeper knowledge of the field itself, and also stakeholder interest instead of a superfluous application of stats. And more importantly, perhaps, we use our industry-specific software that are often closed system, proprietary, hidden behind a high paywall, and thus largely absent from ChatGPT training data. So to think about this in a large picture way, this is actually, I think, a fight between 100-year-old institutions and infrastructure of capitalism and the new AI technology that threatens to democratize everything. AI is taking control of areas where there was less control by the capitalistic substrate of our society. So like open source software such as Python and R, which my general stats colleagues heavily rely upon. And it may move more slowly towards more domain-specific knowledge fields just because of this 100-year-old capitalist substrate that has been built. So having said that, though, domain-specific training of AI is accelerating. The advance of AI into domain-specific knowledge, I think, can be understood as the gradual erosion of this structure, this capitalist structure we just talked about. But I think when the stakes are high, the resistance will be high as well. So, for example, in the financial industry, most of the financiers and actuaries I talk to, they readily admit AI will add so much efficiency and scale to their work, but they still want tons of control to train the AI, and eventually they want to be the risk manager of AI as well, because the systems still have so much bias hidden deep in the tomes of data we use, and also its penchant for hallucination. One more point. So because our students will be domain experts instead of just a user of general tools, one of the tasks for us educator is to direct them to ask more on the question of why, and prompt them to delve deeper into issues like social scientists. So traditionally, my students included, and perhaps a lot of my colleagues and myself included, when we speak a technical language about how models work, we often don't quite understand the social dynamics in the data. And social science is obviously all about unpacking the question of why. So for professionals in my field, I think our resilience in the age of AI may derive in part from supplying a human touch to cases where AI as a tool may rush to judgment. Lastly, when the day comes, when a niche field like ours will have to delegate most of our technical work to AI, I agree with what a lot of our humanities professors have come to make peace with already. So instead of banning AI in our courses, I think we need to raise the bar on the baseline for students' work product. A lot of the humanities profs are already asking, for instance, does this piece of student paper actually demonstrate a level of mastery and sophistication that surpasses what a robot can do? And I think in STEM, we'll have to ask similar questions. And also when that day comes, I do think we need to take a moment to acknowledge that a lot of much valued humanist qualities, For instance, slow reading, slow reflection, long form, ruminative writing, rigorous, independent, critical thinking, perhaps will be behind us. And as some of the writers have already pointed out, that sense of mastery that comes from just doing the work autonomously and independently would be lost. And I do think that's a genuine loss that we as a society should take some time to mourn. And I'll leave on this not so cheerful note. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I suggest that now we bring some chairs here and all the speakers sit there. And I have this mic. There's the other mic that the speakers were wearing. And this I don't know, it doesn't come off. So I'm gonna give you this mic. Somebody take it.
Hello.
I'm going to pass the mic to those who want to ask questions. And Auntie, you want to stay there? You want to stay there? Okay. Oh, no, that's okay. You're very, very welcome to come. Everybody, all the people who said something can come here. I'll give you a chair. Oh, you have the chair, okay.
Ryan's got one.
So I'm the only person who's gonna stand here, and I'm gonna pass the mic to people if they have questions. Please wait for me, because not because I'm just crazy for the mic. I know that people do not like the mic, but it's because people on Zoom cannot hear if we don't use the mic, okay? Okay, so I don't know if we should start with a discussion or we should start with a question to whet your appetite. Okay, so I think
we can just do questions.
I think that, but you were first. You was first, and then you're second.
Hi guys, I liked all your presentations. I have a question about psychological operations and generative AI. So when the Syrian gas attacks happened back in like 2011, like I was watching all these videos on social media, and they were actually clips from the Bhopal gas attack in India, and it was just like completely fake news. I was wondering if you guys could comment on like news reporting on using generative AI, and if you've noticed any psychological operations or fake news using generative AI. That's it.
Should we take another question, or do you want to say something?
Well, maybe I'll speak to it.
Okay.
I'm mic'd. I mean, I certainly feel like weird stuff is happening all the time now. I mean, there are the like viral sensations like the Pope in the puffy jacket, right? But there was a, yeah, and actually it was you with the salmon, right? Yeah. Like, yeah, weird stuff just happens on the internet now. And, you know, I feel like there's a super blurry line between whether it's just people doing random stuff and then it getting misinterpreted in a game of telephone, which like used to happen on Twitter all the time, versus now, you know, somebody actually using generative AI to make a deep fake and then using bot accounts to like promote that up. But like, yeah, I mean, our world has just become super surreal. And I mean, one of the things that I realized a long time ago with the internet is like, it's really important to like, think about your information nutrition, right? Like it's so easy on the internet to just consume junk food, like junk news, junk everything. And then like over time, your mind just becomes this like I don't know, like plump, useless, like, you know, unfit. And so like it just, I mean, I think of it kind of like straitjackets too, right? You just need to get used to the idea that like, wow, I'm really only going to look at a few places that I've come to trust. And furthermore, at least once a year, I'm going to look at these places and see whether in fact they are still worth trusting. Like, because things change over time. Sometimes it, you know, the news site you used to trust so slowly morphed into something that is now hateful that like you can't continue anymore. And I mean, the trouble with my solution, of course, is it's totally individual, and lots of people go off on their own lines. And like, really, we need some kind of equivalent of like an immune system. And like it used to be that, you know, reporters had fact checkers at the news organizations, but all of that has been blown up by the internet, and we don't have any equivalent of an information, you know, immune system online anymore. And expecting people to do it.
No, that's what the AI is for. I mean, I fully expect the our information immune system to be our AI assistants in the future. I think that's the only way, and people are working towards systems where we're like tracking how things are made and using encryption to try and make it so that something like AI can really see, you know, the full generation process of anything that you're looking at. And again, that's like too much for you to evaluate, but it's very trivial for software to do that for you. So you'll have an immune system. And this is good news. I mean, we should have had this years ago, and it's only until like rich people get scared that anything actually happens. So.
Before you, I think trusting tools is bad. So I think we should also develop our own critical thought about it. And I've definitely been scrolling on the internet and seen things and be like, that's really interesting. And then you look a bit closer, you're like, that's AI. And then like you were saying, like you lose your trust. I think there was a charity, I can't remember what it was, that used some mid-journey generated images to try and do a campaign. And I saw it and I was like, wow. And then you look for the comments on that photo and the responses, and people were like, this is terrible. Like this is not the way to go about getting sympathy for this cause, is creating more fake news. Even though the news is true, but illustrating it with a fake image is like very damaging. And especially when it's obviously fake. So don't trust tools. Trust your brain, and trust some tools alongside your brain, maybe.
And I think people will start to see this theme. Ryan is the optimist, and I'm the pessimist. And I have to say, I think fact-checking, even before generative AI, is so hard to do. Like, that's why there are people devote their lives to do investigative journalism and go into these extremely dangerous places and stay there for a very extensive period of time to try to figure out the truth. And at the end of the day, there's still, even after all of that, a lot of the reportage will be based on your perspective, your ideology, your upbringing, your belief, your worldview, right? So even before generative AI, fact-checking is very difficult, and I absolutely think it's a hot mess we're in with all the content just generate at our fingertips and without really any quality control. And I myself really only look at a few major media, but when I look at them, as what Dan was saying, I always have to apply critical view as well, because even the best media with so much resource, often the content is a reflection of how they see the world.
I'm just like such an
such an optimist.
So I'm something between optimist and pessimist. I think to address any kind of emerging technology or past technologies really requires for us to wonder about what exactly that is, who made it, for what purpose, and in which direction might this kind of technology be used or abused. And that goes back to the first stone that hit somebody's head, or somebody used it as a grinding stone to make a flour. I think you have to really constantly think about both the histories and also the possible futures. And I really want to call this in a kind of plurality kind of way. There will always be, and I agree with Vicky, there is always a kind of a collective conversation and power dynamics at play. And in the humanities, of course, we distinguish between history, his historiography and historicity, which speaks to exactly distinguishing between what is a fact? What is the interpretation of a fact? How does that interpretation and the fact now work in this contemporary context? And I apply these kind of analytical ways of thinking as much to any kind of emerging or past technology, but also by practically and proactively engaging with it. And I think that's why teaching courses like yours, for example, or like yours, I do this in my courses also, to understand these kind of technologies not just as a tool, but also as a social reality of materialized relationships. And we need to decide how we want to be part of that, or if we just want to consume and let it go, basically. But then we might be at the receiving end of things that we do not like.
My optimism stems because I don't think it can get much worse than it is right now. I mean, I think things can get a lot better.
So much worse.
No, but think about it this way: like we've built the worst, like the most effective propaganda, for-profit propaganda in Fox News, right? When we have AI that can filter out. Like, do you have ad blockers right now? Everybody should be running ad blockers, but that should be built into every piece of software you use. It should be keeping your mind safe from the super well-funded propaganda campaigns that we have allowed to infect our society, right? We can fight back when we have tons of intelligence that's working for us individuals. Like, we can't fight back against the intelligences that are working against us right now, because we don't have that power, we don't have that intelligence against them. It's an unfair fight. It's a large corporations against individuals. We can change that ratio with the AI is working for us. It gets a little bit more fair.
Okay, so there's another question. It's been waiting for a long time. So can I give the mic to him and maybe we can build into it, because I have the sensation that it's gonna be a segue to it. Like you were making faces. So. and in the cases, in cases somebody from the audience online wants to ask a question, please put it in the chat and I will see it and I will give you the floor, or I can read it for you. Okay.
So thanks for your presentations, first of all. Just a couple of points as a question. The first one is, do you believe that we need a general public education on statistics, first of all? Because if we're doing large language modules, we should understand where those large language modules are picking up data from, first of all, right? And we don't have that right now. You can just look at news broadcasts and people talking about the Dow went up 2 points. No one understands what the Dow Jones is in the first place. It went up 2 points out of 35,000 points. What does it matter, right? So that's the first point. The second one is we've already fallen into a trap of worshiping at the altar of technology, right? So when people, and I've seen this in the corporate world, where there's been a discussion in a meeting about a certain process, and someone's pulled out their laptop and checked ChatGPT and said, well, you know, the definition is this. And everyone who had a valid point just leaves it and says, oh, well, you know, the definition is that. So it's already happening. So I do love your optimism, but I think it's going to take a lot of training. That's my question.
Yeah. You want to answer or?
Yeah, I mean, those are all great things. I think if we wanted everybody to learn something, it would be like how power works. I think that's like the most important thing for everybody to learn. But I mean, stats is great too.
Well, and I'm happy to chime in on that front too. I did this course in second year university called critical thinking, which honestly should have been mandatory in like grade 10. Oh my God. Yeah, just like you know, how to look at an argument and take it apart.
The humanities for doing this, but yes.
Yeah, how to look at an argument and take it apart, how to think about where, you know, ideas come from, like elementary versions of like, you know, thinking, right? Like what is an argument consist of? What's a syllogism? All the like sort of Aristotle kind of level thinking, right? And even though like I mean at that point I already had like multiple years of university level math, and so the math was sort of trivial, but the application to thinking about the news, to thinking about what you read, to thinking about what people tell you, it just changed me a lot. And it, like I said, it should just be mandatory in like grade 10. It's certainly comprehensible by people at that level. And I mean, and once you get me started about ranting about what should be taught in high school, we can go on forever and ever. So maybe I'll end there. And
I think that obviously I think interrogation is good. I think it really depends on like the group of people you're working with. Like obviously if it's a bunch of art students, statistics can be challenging. But what I try and do, regardless of discipline, is if it's coders, we back engineer these models, we see how it's working, we see what a transformer does, we see how diffusion works. That's great for people that have technical knowledge, but for people who maybe don't have computational skills, still back engineering it, but creating language that helps them understand, going through that process visually rather than computationally, and like looking at how an LLM predicts, the kind of the basis of how it might predict. And using analogies is really helpful for that quite often. So actually things like thinking about cut up poetry has been a really nice way of showcasing how this kind of prediction works and how meaning can be made from kind of a corpus or a very kind of finite corpus of information. You can have a lot of combinatorial meanings. That's been quite an effective way, is having kind of analogies. So I think interrogation is really important. Not always statistics or coding, but having some kind of language and getting people to challenge through the medium that they understand is very important, though, I believe.
Sure, I'm all for general stats for everyone. I think that's what my colleagues are in fact doing. U of T, in fact, right now has this initiative of having everybody learn data science, including English major, all humanities students. Obviously, digital humanity is a very big field as well. So a lot of humanity scholars and future scholars do want to learn stats to begin with. And as you said, basically there's financial literacy as well. That's so important. 2 points out of 3,000 points is nothing. That's a relative quantitative reasoning that should be embedded in everyone's education, even art students. They probably have their stock portfolio too, right? And I absolutely agree that we are all seemingly worshiping technology without questioning it enough. And that is a sense that I always kind of bring to my course. Long before AI, we use a lot of technology, and a lot of our models are just absolutely wrong. It's useful, but absolutely wrong, and our students forget about the wrong part. They are very much worshiper at that altar. So we always constantly have to tell them, well, in these cases, look, this will not work. It will entirely break down, and these people will be influenced. Think about these people at the end, of the users at the end. They're faceless to you, but they are not truly faceless. These things have real impact. Yeah, so thank you for your very, very eloquent points.
So yeah, I would like to know more about statistics and any kind of computational activity, including coding and programming and these kind of things. I was really struck this summer when the godfather of AI of U of T suddenly proclaimed 2 things. First, he will be retiring and be in his garden. And the other one, that he will not work with Google anymore, because it suddenly had occurred to him that perhaps there's a problem ethically with AI. And so therefore, he should stop working in this area, and particularly for Google. Then he went on to do an interview on CNN where he was asked about that. And the interviewer asked him if he thought, now that he has come to this conclusion, that it wouldn't be kind of a cowardly act to then retire to his garden, but instead maybe do something so that more programmers can understand perhaps the ethics of their doing, and questioning more critically the mechanical and mathematical operations that they engage with, which all are also have a social and political and economical dimension, which often is forgotten in the process. And Jeffrey Hinton is just a very good example for that mindset. And it is with that in mind that my lab and many other communities and collectives, and the Outside Salon is certainly one of those collectives as well here as the artists in residence in the Fields Institute, who do this kind of work, who bring people together who might be specialists in statistics and people like me who are interested in both statistics and the people who are specialized in it, so that we can learn from each other. And so the interdisciplinarity, the integrational kind of knowledge creation is really important. And so I like this idea actually, or the already practice in place that UFT now ask everybody across the board to learn financial literacy and other types of literacy, right? So I think that's really important to also create a common language that we can actually speak. How often have we talked about the fact that the disciplinary languages that are highly specialized really preventing us from communicating with other people and to actually understand what the heck they're talking about, including the DAO and the 2% problem, right? So that's my very practical answer to this, which I also practice. I'm not just talking about it.
I had a thought. Whatever field you're in, like if you look at the content that's published at like the highest professional level, whether it's literature, statistics, maths, code, whatever, and if you go through that, you're still going to spot mistakes. And even stuff at the top of its game is still fallible. And that gets impacted if it's put into systems, whether it's AI or not AI. But that's also the data set that's being learned from. So one, we should never ever Google or ChatGPT an answer. We should always, again, use critical thinking, but we should be kind of aware that we all make mistakes, and that's what's kind of fed through these systems as well. As there's mistakes, there's bias, there's error, and that's a really big part of that. And that can be really fun and exciting as long as you know and account for that.
Thanks. Okay, so there's three questions or comments. So can we make it quick enough so that we can finish at 8, because it's like 3 minutes away. It's gonna be like very tough, but like it's one question here, one question there, and the last question there. So that is gonna be the last question, okay?
And
so
what about the people on the
I'm monitoring, but I don't see anybody.
Oh, you can read this from there? Wow.
Yeah, I can. Well, I can see that when there's a chat coming up, there's the red thing that comes up. I just changed my prescription. So.
You're just such a smart person.
Hi. So this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I think Ryan mentioned something like responding to someone else's question, like, oh, like everyone should be able to like make art in like whatever capacity and like kind of all these things. So I'm a creative, an artist, and you also mentioned something along the lines of like AI should be a tool to use to like make dreams come true. Hopefully not for like world domination, control, all these negative things. But what if all these negative things go into the like creative world? So like how AI is like fueling somewhat like the strikes in the US happening, the writer's strike, the actor's strike, VFX, animation. So what do you have to say on that, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is the challenge, is that these tools are empowering people, and if the people are empowered to do terrible things, we've got big problems. I mean, I think the thing to keep in mind is the people who have the power right now are already committing terrible acts with that power. And so the people that are gaining power are usually just the normal, you know, friendly, happy people. And those are the people we want to empower and like outnumber the people that, you know, have gained power through the wrong reasons and are wielding it for the, you know, wrong reasons. So, I mean, I think we need to make huge societal changes, and, you know, how we do that is by having people who don't have a lot of power be empowered through these tools to make these sorts of big changes. So, I mean, it's super dangerous time, but like when it's unstable, that's where we have some opportunity to make change, that when you can't make that change when it's a status quo and the power is, you know, your question when status quo is dominant is how much do you want to submit? I'm not into that. I like things a little bit more unstable where you can make change.
I mean, I just want to add, I always, we talked about this too, I always have huge respect and huge appreciation of artists who have done their craft, spent decades of their life, devote themselves to art making and craft enhancement. So I absolutely see this as a real existential threat to serious artists. I think there's no way around not talking about that. I do agree with Ryan that the compensation structure around art and artists will have to change, accommodate these changes. But I do also worry, you know, Ryan talked about how we're good at curating than making art. That's fairly straightforward, but I mean, as the humanity become dumbing down because these tools and less original idea that needs to be autonomously made, I wonder if we will lose that power of curation as well. How do we tell which art is better? We lose the taste of it, you know? That's something in the longer run, perhaps we'll have to face as well.
Who would see Vin Diesel cake shop edit?
Thank you so much for your presentations. I really appreciated it. One of the most compelling uses of AI, in my eyes, is using it to improve our wellness. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, or what kind of AI tools do you use in your personal life to optimize your personal health, such as your physical or mental health, your habits, and your overall well-being?
I mean, I feel like as the QI or QS guy, I need to answer that. Sadly, I haven't found much use of the new generative AI for this kind of thing. Obviously, technology in general has been super useful. That's the sort of the heart of the QS movement in some sense, is like we can use technology in order to track our diet, our exercise, our blood work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in that way, hope to learn things. And I do actually feel like if you sort of look at what's happening on, you know, TikTok and Twitter in terms of the like gym culture and stuff, that like knowledge of how to do exercises and how to eat properly and stuff has become super democratized compared to where it was like 10 years ago. I mean, you know, I don't know about your feeds, but like in my feeds, 1 out of every 10 videos is some girl showing you how to do the freaking butt exercises to get the bubble butt, right? Like this is obviously some kind of lowest common denominator of like health. Maybe it's like super debased, I don't know. But I still haven't seen that, you know, you can use these tools to like automate your tracking in any meaningful way. Like the hard parts of the project in QS was always your own behavior change. And I don't think that generative AI has made behavior change any easier. And maybe we'll get there. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine. But like if you think about the like capitalist machinery is very interested in behavior change in general. And the best that they've figured out is like targeted ads, which obviously have miserable effectiveness. You know, you pay $20 for 1,000 impressions, clearly implying it's not great. But I don't think that the problem is impossible. And sort of zooming out from that, like capitalism is this idea that we can like sort of enclose the commons and then profit. And like, does enclosing your own self in order to like put the technology in there to make it, you know, like make yourself do things, is this the right paradigm even? like, I mean, this is one reason that I'm a little conflicted about the QS thing in a way that I was not 10 years ago, is like the sort of the ratcheting of the technology wrench is focusing ever more closely on yourself and things you really care about, and even things like the behavioral change feedback loop that is at the heart of QS and the reason you were using technology to self-track. And like, is this like colonial mindset towards yourself actually healthy? And I don't know how to answer that question, but I'm now asking it.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about mental health of our students in particular, since we are facing, it seems, quite a crisis among the student population as we have it at the moment in the University of Toronto. It seems to me that any kind of social change or behavioral change always requires what I would call social labor. You have to kind of engage in that particular problem. And so first you need to analyze what is actually accelerating these massive new numbers of students, 70% at the moment, I think, at U of T, who kind of self-identify as somehow mentally, well, maybe not mentally ill, but mentally stressed. There has been a report that was published 2019, and a number of initiatives have come out of that, one of which is the InLight Student Mental Health Research. But then there's also people like the Digital Dramaturgy Lab Squared or the Interactive Media Lab at Engineering, the Critical Digital Humanities Institute, and also collaborating departments like the Center for Drama, Theater, and Performance Studies and the Department for Industrial and Mechanical Engineering, of which the Interactive Media Lab is part of. And so they funded through their Exceed Fund a project that we call Play Strong, in which we try to figure out if we can support students in doing this kind of social labor, of understanding themselves, of understanding the challenges they face, and to find ways of how to address them in creative ways. And so that they can feel some agency. And we have done a number of several projects over the last 2 years. One was, for example, an interdisciplinary workshop that was called AltTech, where computational artists, social robotics people, psychologists, theater performance artists, and so on and so forth came together to discuss this problem, but then, and also not just discuss it, but also offer actual palpable solutions to that. And in April and May, we ran a workshop series where we tested several interactive performance spaces to see if students could use them to help them to create a better self-awareness, and then to see where to go from there. So we are still doing in this research, but there has been funding for this, seed funding for this. There have been international collaborations. And one of the things that came up during this workshop, when we were also collaborating with international scholar artists like Gustavo Sol from Sao Paulo, who is an actor and a director, but also a computational artist, saying that maybe the project that we were testing, that was designed by him, would benefit from what he told us is genetic AI, which is a particular kind of technology which is developing right now. So we are looking into this in support. I think I need some water, so maybe I just talk too much. I'm just saying these kind of things are happening, but they're very complex. And we have collaborated with a whole range of students, one of which a doctoral student is here, who also helped Evan with one part of the project as well, where we try to understand the discourses on mental health as they are historically and contemporary apparent in the Varsity Student magazine, but also in some other magazines published by U of T, but also we did a roundtable discussion with student activists in the field to ask them, what is it you need? What do you think is missing? How can we help? And so all of these different strands are coming together. And of course, some of those applications will be AI-based and others will not. But the social labor remains, and you have to just do it.
We have we have one last question. I don't know, is it a long question or is it? So if we can answer very, very quickly to this one, this is gonna be the last one.
Yes,
And then
Yeah, thank you for your talks. I just wanted to ask, when using and promoting generative AI in your works and disciplines, do you consider integrating principles from like AI alignment and safety research? Like, do you stay up to date with it as you create new projects? Or is it just kind of like, oh, there's a new model on Jupyter Notebook, let's just pull it up and put a bunch of prompts that can maybe be divisive and lead to a biased data set? Yeah.
It's a really good question. I think I used to do that, just like go for it. And I think especially for if you're working in like art and tech, there's like this kind of like cycle of like really wanting to be like an early adopter, like really wanting to be one of the first people to do it, because at the end of the day, regardless sometimes of quality, people at the beginning of these waves, like NFTs, are the ones that get the money. So for me, there's been like a conscious uncoupling from that kind of being stuck in that cycle, and trying to decouple from that and think more critically about the tools and also what I want to do. So for me, having some kind of agency and control over these tools is really important. And that takes time when you're engaging with a new tool. So I do play around with the new tools, and I kind of will often do analyses against other tools to see how they're working differently and kind of write about that and like kind of try and publish that so other people can kind of draw those conclusions. And I take a big backseat and process all the information that I've learned as well, and go back to working with what I know really well, and then slowly incorporate these newer tools. And as I see what other people are doing and what kind of works, what doesn't work, what might be problematic, try and work around that, and also engage people in those topics and be like, this is maybe an issue that you should not be making images in this way. I have quite a few thoughts on that. And trying to do that in a way that isn't like too confrontational is challenging as well, especially on the internet. Any other?
Just very quickly, so just from a data set point of view, so increasingly there are these algorithms that you can readily use to sort of mitigate these bias inherent in the data. So I'm currently working with sort of the professional organization to try to convince the industry to use it. For instance, the financial industry, they have this tool at their fingertips. It's almost free at this point, but they don't want to use it because when you mitigate bias, you also decrease the performance of the model to some extent. Not by a lot. I think that trade-off is very worthwhile, but it's still, we're talking about probably a few $1 million for $1 billion business. So that's the challenge, because there's an economic model opposing mitigating bias, even though when there is now algorithmically, you can mitigate bias to a great extent. But even on top of that, you can't entirely trust these algorithms either. It's really needs to go from the collection, the source of the data. That's when things will actually change. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as an artist, you're just very lucky because everything's so unexplored that the most important thing is to like find out what's in that mirror, right? So yeah, I think for my practice, it is about like finding out what is the bias, because I mean, people speak about bias as sort of being a problematic thing, but I mean, I think revealing that is revealing truths about the internet content that it's on the training data, which is generated right now by us. I mean, this is beautiful to reveal that. I mean, the problematic stuff is what, again, artists have it easy. It's like, we want to find that stuff. We don't have to get things, right. We can highlight the things that aren't right, yeah.
Something I've encountered that's quite problematic, at least in my opinion, is sometimes I work with, third parties, organizations, and their messaging about the tools that they're using and how they're using those tools often serves to create more of a black box around what they're doing. And I think that's a really big issue, is people trying to maintain their level of power by saying this is actually really difficult when they're actually using quite simple proprietary tools. Like lots of people now use GPT, but they try and make it out, at least in some, I've worked with advertising agencies and theater companies and things like that, that kind of like try and make it sound more complicated than it is because they're nervous about how easy it is to use. And that when that gets adopted by the majority of people, they will lose that stream of income, that mysticism that they have, that they know about AI. And I think that's a really important thing to consider, as well as how are people messaging about their use of AI and who are the experts? Because often, like with the early adoption thing, sometimes there's experts who don't know that much about a topic, but they got in there early and people listen to them, and just like a biased or corrupted data set, it gets compounded.
And we're running late, so hopefully I'll be brief, and then you can have a few words too. So I just use the tools, the professional tools already online, and those teams have already done an enormous amount of work to try to make sure that you cannot generate all kinds of things. So for instance, Midjourney, all kinds of words can't be used. Sometimes ChatGPT would write a prompt asking for something slightly racier or whatever. Almost any word like erotic or nude or whatever, banned by Midjourney's user interface. But that said, the outputs of these systems are still horribly biased. So for instance, one of the things I noticed in my vast collection of images, I would always prompt in a sort of gender neutral way, never asking for race or anything. But inevitably, if I'm asking for like a community leader, what I get is an image of a black woman. If I'm asking for a beautiful lady, what I get is a white woman. And like this probably, like Ryan said, reflects what's on the internet. It's just a sort of part of our reality, or actually I think a better way of saying it is part of how our reality is portrayed, right? And now my photos propagate that same thing unless I go to extreme extents. So for instance, actually I just did this thing at Pari's request. I did the Lovers. It's one of the very famous tarot cards, right? Yeah, it comes out with two white people, obviously. But it is possible to prompt Midjourney to have it generate like other races. I was trying to get it to give me an interracial couple, like literally, a person of color and a white person, or an Asian person and a person of color, like anything really. I couldn't succeed. I didn't ever manage to get an interracial couple, but I did succeed in getting a South Asian couple, and I got an Asian couple. Like it is possible to get it to give you other things sometimes. And the the sort of the question for my tarot deck is, how much work am I actually going to put in to try to fight the global unconscious, like way things are portrayed from the training data? Like, do I care a lot? Exactly. It's a reflection of the way that the world is organized and portrayed. Yeah.
One hack I've found, sorry, with these tools is actually if you feed it
maybe it's
web data. So if you feed it an image, you can get these tools that are circumnavigated. Like Midjourney now has taken this out, but if you go back to Midjourney version 3, which you can do in the bar, you can type it, you can put in an image of pretty much anything. You can get some pretty great, I've tried this, I like to break things, so I've tried it with pornography and things like that. And you can get it to generate things that it's not meant to do by giving it different inputs in different ways.
A jailbreak.
Exactly. But yeah, if you put in something like blood orange, it won't do it because blood is against its library of words. So you can certainly hack these tools, but yeah.
So I think one of the main problems is really the black boxing that you mentioned, not to allow people interested in a particular technology or instrument to actually know how it works. And so you are dealing with a black box entity that has already integrated certain assumptions, design assumptions, purposes, biases that you cannot understand. you can only try to understand it by using this particular application or tool or whatever it might be and see what it does. So you have certain experiences and then you share that. But of course, what can we say about that systematically and other than just on a kind of individual level? So for me in my work and also with the students, the co-learning with students, it is to at least ask the question, what is it we're dealing with? I'm not against technology. I do not endorse technology naively in any way, but I'm always very interested what it is and how it works and what we can do with it. And that's where the literacy and the learning part comes into the picture again. I am immediately nervous when I hear any narratives related to magic, miracle, it saves time. In 3 seconds, you can do things that you usually need a lifetime to achieve. So I want to point out these things and want to discuss these things with collaborators, with colleagues, with my students, to then see what we do with that. And not just to embrace a new toy. You know, if I want a toy, I don't even need a thing. And so I think the black boxing, the making visible how these mechanisms work socially and politically. And I mentioned this one online discussion, making kin with machines, where a number of different indigenous views are presented. One part of the discussion is a totally statistical one that brings us back to the 2%, only in a different context, where they say, you know, population-wise, we are 2% now after colonialism in North America. And so the representation in terms of data sets of those 2% who also then in addition do not have a lot of access to these technologies and these knowledges either. What do we think we will get out of it when we make images based on these data sets? And so then the question becomes, what do we do with that? How can you hack something that is already a hack?
I think it's time. Like, we've been going on and on and on forever. And I really thank you for your patience. Also, the people at home, I didn't see any question, but I hope that it's because they were very absorbed and interested. So thanks so much for staying with us. And thanks to this fantastic panel. We had.
Thank you for organizing.
Well, and Eric also.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.